What's worse than a bad TV show? A bad spin-off that nobody wanted in the first place. Hollywood in the 70s was desperate to bottle lightning twice, sometimes with characters we barely remembered, or concepts that should have died in the writer's room. Ever find yourself yelling at the screen, "Who asked for this?" Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive headfirst into 12 disasters that prove not every TV legend needs a sequel, or even a second thought. Aftermash 1983-85. Imagine you're riding the high of the most-watched TV finale in history. Over 100 million Americans, yes, more people than watched the moon landing, tuned in to say goodbye to Mass H. It was an emotional gut punch, a moment of collective catharsis. So naturally, CBS couldn't resist spinning the wheel one more time, hoping to cash in on the leftover nostalgia. Thus was born Aftermash, the answer to the question literally nobody was asking. What's next for Colonel Potter, Klinger, and Father Mulcahy? Here's where the absurdity begins. Instead of the dark humor and high-stakes absurdity of war, Aftermash transplanted 3 fan-favorite characters into a dreary Missouri veterans hospital. Gone was the pressure cooker of the 4077th. Instead, we got bureaucratic misadventures, endless paperwork, and sitcom plots straight out of an HR manual. It was as if someone replaced Hawkeye's still with a water cooler and told everyone to lighten up, while also somehow being even sadder. If you think audiences were lining up for more, think again. The drop-off was immediate and brutal. Viewers missed the razor-sharp banter, the bitter edge, and the looming threat of war. Instead, they got C-list hospital drama and running gags about hospital food. Even die-hard MASH fans could barely recognize their beloved characters, now stripped of all their quirks and chemistry, reduced to aimlessly wandering the halls looking for laughs and not finding any. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. CBS threw money at the screen, hoping for a miracle. They paired Aftermash with top shows, tried new time slots, and even tinkered with the cast. But you can't squeeze juice from a lemon that's already been zested. By the end of season 2, CBS quietly pulled the plug and swept the show into the TV graveyard, hoping everyone would forget the mess. Instead, Aftermash became a punchline, proof that sometimes the best goodbye really is goodbye. Would you want to see what happened to your favorite war heroes once the war was over and all the stakes were gone? Neither did anyone else. Mrs. Columbo, 1979-80. Some TV mysteries are better left unsolved. Take Columbo's wife, a legendary character never actually seen on screen, but endlessly referenced by Peter Falk's rumpled detective. She was a running joke, a wink to the audience, a ghostly presence we could all imagine in our own way. So what did NBC do? In a move that redefined missing the point, they decided to show us Mrs. Columbo. And they didn't just show her, they gave her an entire spin-off, then made every possible mistake along the way. First, let's talk casting. Instead of the middle-aged, matronly woman Columbo always described, producers cast a 20-something Kate Mulgrew as a plucky young journalist, somehow married to a man twice her age. The cognitive dissonance was immediate. Fans cried foul, critics sharpened their knives, and even Peter Falk himself wanted nothing to do with it. The result? A character that didn't match anything the original ever implied, and a tone that felt like someone had remixed Columbo with Nancy Drew, without the charm of either. The show's premise was equally baffling. Rather than basking in the sly, slow-burn deduction of the original, Mrs. Columbo was off having perky adventures, raising a daughter, and solving crimes that somehow always landed in her lap. The show fumbled its own lore, ignored continuity, and even retconned its own title, changing it to Kate Loves a Mystery mid-run in a desperate bid to stem the outrage. It didn't work. Audiences hated it, the ratings collapsed, and the network eventually pretended she was never Columbo's wife in the first place. What went wrong? Everything. The entire charm of Columbo's unseen spouse was the not knowing, the winking references, the private world you never quite got to see. By turning the mystery into a literal face on the screen, NBC killed the magic. The lesson? Not every shadow needs a spotlight. Sometimes, what you don't see is far more interesting than what you do. And sometimes, solving the mystery just ruins the fun. The Ropers, 1979-80. If you ever needed proof that some characters work best in small doses, look no further than The Ropers. On Three's Company, Stanley and Helen Roper were sitcom gold, two bickering landlords dropping sexual innuendos, clutching their pearls at Jack Tripper's every move, and serving up one-liners faster than you could say rental agreement. But then, in a display of optimism bordering on delusion, network execs decided these two could anchor a show on their own. Spoiler alert. They couldn't. The setup. The Ropers moved from their cozy Santa Monica apartment building to an upscale neighborhood, ready to rub elbows with the social elite. The result? All the charm and tension of Three's Company evaporated, leaving behind 30 minutes of marital gripes and stale jokes about their non-existent sex life. Gone was the youthful chaos of Jack and the girls. Instead, viewers were treated to endless complaints about the neighbors, failed attempts at fitting in, and Stanley's working-class awkwardness clashing with Helen's sudden ambitions. It was like going to your favorite restaurant and discovering they only serve cold leftovers now. Worse, the chemistry that sizzled when Stanley and Helen played off the main cast went limp in isolation. With no one but each other to spar with, their banter quickly turned into exhausting, repetitive arguments. It turns out, what was hilarious in small bites becomes tiresome as the main course. The writing failed to capture any new magic. Instead, it leaned on running gags and recycled jokes. Even the actors, Norman Fell and Audra Lindley, seemed to know they were treading water, valiantly trying to make awkward dialogue sound like punchlines. Ratings plummeted fast. Fans missed the wild antics of Three's Company, and the new setting only highlighted just how much these characters needed someone else to bounce off. After 2 seasons and a slew of weak scripts, the Ropers packed their bags for good, never to return to sitcom glory. Would you watch your favorite supporting characters struggle through forced plot lines with no one to play off? NBC learned the hard way. Sometimes the landlord is only funny when he's knocking on someone else's door. Delta House 1979. If you ever wondered what happens when you squeeze all the mischief out of a college comedy, Delta House is your cautionary tale. The original Animal House movie was a riot, raunchy, loud, unpredictable, and the absolute embodiment of late 70s rebellion. John Belushi's Bluto was a legend. So what did ABC do? They scooped up the rights, stripped away the R rating, and served up a sanitized, neutered version that left fans howling for all the wrong reasons. Picture this. No booze-fueled toga parties, no food fights, no lewd jokes. Instead, the Deltas faced wholesome campus mishaps and tamed-down pranks that wouldn't scare a nun. Josh Mostel was cast as Blotto, a clear attempt to replace the magnetic chaos of Belushi, but with none of the unpredictable spark. The rest of the Deltas, reduced to sitcom stereotypes, their rowdy edge dulled by network censors and bad writing. If Animal House was a wild night out, Delta House was detention with the fun police. What's more, the show tried desperately to replicate the movie's chemistry, but failed spectacularly. The infamous catchphrases, the boundary-pushing gags, the breakneck energy, gone. Viewers who tuned in expecting the same anarchic spirit of the film were left blinking at scenes that felt like rejected material from Welcome Back, Kotter. Even a cameo from Stephen Bishop, smashing his guitar in a nod to the movie, couldn't save it. Without the chaos, the show was just another college sitcom, only with the bitter aftertaste of what could have been. The verdict from critics and audiences alike was swift and unforgiving. The ratings tanked, and Delta House was expelled after just 13 episodes. ABC learned the hard way that sometimes you can't recycle magic for prime time, especially when you drain it of everything that made it controversial and beloved. You wouldn't watch The Godfather if everyone played by the rules. Why would anyone want Animal House if everyone follows the campus handbook? Some things are meant to break the rules. Delta House played it safe and bored everyone to tears. Logans Run, 1977-78. Logans Run, the movie, was a cult science fiction hit, a chilling vision of the future where no one lives past 30, complete with dazzling effects and heavy existential dread. It practically begged to remain untouched. But in true 70s TV fashion, CBS saw an opportunity for a weekly sci-fi adventure and asked, what if we take that dark dystopian universe and turn it into a family-friendly serial? Cue the sound of millions of sci-fi fans groaning in unison. What ended up on screen was a classic case of expectations versus budget. Logan and Jessica, now fugitives, wandered a post-apocalyptic America in search of safety and meaning. But instead of epic set pieces or grand questions about mortality, viewers got recycled props, bargain basement costumes, and endless Civilization of the Week episodes. Each week, our heroes would stumble into a new oddball society, narrowly escape trouble, and then hit the reset button as if none of it mattered. If you were hoping for the edge and atmosphere of the film, you were out of luck. Logan's TV adventure felt more like a parade of leftovers from other CBS shows, hastily cobbled together. The show's flaws were impossible to ignore. The visual effects, so crucial to the original, looked cheap, even by 70s standards. The writing looped in circles, repeating the same structure until audiences lost patience, and any attempt at character development got buried under the need for fresh but shallow one-off plots. Ratings slipped almost immediately, and even die-hard sci-fi fans deserted the dome for greener pastures. Logans Run limped along for just 14 episodes before CBS quietly let it die, outlived by every single Star Trek rerun on the air. The message? You can't clone the soul of a cult classic with a TV budget and a watered-down premise. Instead of asking what it means to live, Logan's Run just asked viewers to tune in, and most of them answered, no thanks. Sometimes, the only thing scarier than a dystopian future is what network execs can do to your favorite movie. Fish. There are TV characters who light up every scene, right up until someone gives them their own show. Enter Fish, a spin-off of Barney Miller, that might just be the poster child for why some icons are best left in the ensemble. Detective Phil Fish, as played by the eternally weary Abe Vigoda, was a masterclass in deadpan. Always the driest wit in the room, grumbling about hemorrhoids and retirement with the kind of comic timing you can't teach. But drop him into his own series, the result was a one-way ticket to sitcom purgatory. ABC's Fish yanked its title character straight out of the familiar precinct and into a house stuffed with foster kids. Yes, you heard right. The man who could barely stomach paperwork was suddenly running a chaotic home for troubled youth. The setup screamed wacky, mismatched family fun, but the execution was anything but. The show swapped out the camaraderie of Barney Miller's tight-knit cops for a rotating cast of child actors, hoping that Fish's cranky one-liners would somehow sustain a weekly family comedy. Spoiler, they didn't. What made Fish hilarious at the office, his aversion to chaos, his existential exhaustion, just felt mean-spirited and uncomfortable when directed at kids instead of grown men in blue. The jokes grew repetitive, the foster home dynamic became oddly gloomy, and the character's misanthropy felt less like a punchline and more like a cry for help. The scripts tried to soften him with moments of paternal wisdom, but even Vigoda's signature delivery couldn't save a premise that never should have left the bullpen. Audiences weren't fooled, ratings slid, critics grumbled, and even die-hard Barney Miller fans changed the channel. Without the balance of the old ensemble, Fish's magic trick, being hilarious by doing almost nothing, fell flat. Instead, we got a cautionary tale. Just because a side character steals the show, it doesn't mean they can carry one. In the end, Fish flopped back into the TV ocean, a victim of sitcom overreach and a reminder that some flavors are only delicious in small, salty doses. Tabitha, 1977-78. Bewitched's daughter grows up, viewers disappear. Hollywood loves a magic formula, but as Tabitha proved, sometimes all the spellcasting in the world can't save a show that nobody wants. Remember Bewitched, that classic nose-twitching sitcom where Elizabeth Montgomery charmed viewers for 8 seasons as a housewife who just happened to be a witch? By the late 70s, that magic had faded, but the network couldn't let go. Enter Tabitha, the grown-up adventures of Samantha's daughter, or, to be more accurate, the adventures of a character who made 0 sense in her own timeline. Let's start with the weirdest detail. In Bewitched, Tabitha was a kid in the early 70s, but by 1977, she'd somehow aged into a 20-something working woman. Meanwhile, her younger brother Adam appeared suddenly older than her. The show never explained this time warp. Call it TV magic or just bad writing. Lisa Hartman starred as Tabitha, now an ambitious TV station employee trying to hide her powers and navigate office politics. The pitch? A hybrid of workplace comedy and supernatural hijinks. But what made Bewitched great, the oddball relatives, the wild spells, the playful banter between Samantha and her hapless husband, was all missing here. Instead, Tabitha's magic was mostly used to fix trivial problems or create sitcom misunderstandings that wrapped up before the next commercial. The writing was as bland as a forgotten rerun, and Hartman's Tabitha lacked both the charisma and comedic timing of her TV mom. Fans didn't buy it. Even the studio's attempt to throw in cameo appearances and recycled storylines couldn't cover up the lack of chemistry. Ratings fizzled, and the network quietly canceled the show after a single season. As for continuity, forget it. None of the actresses who played Tabitha as a child appeared, and the show contradicted the original's family lore at every turn. Tabitha is what happens when a studio confuses nostalgia for an actual story. In the end, viewers twitched their noses and wished this one out of existence. Blanskys Beauties, 1977. If you thought Hollywood could never wring another drop out of Happy Days, let's introduce you to Blanskys Beauties. This one's a fever dream, even by 70s standards. The beloved family sitcom about 1950s Milwaukee somehow spawned a spin-off about a tough-talking showgirl manager wrangling a troupe of dancers in, wait for it, present-day Las Vegas. The only thing connecting the two? A tacked-on family relation and a cameo or two. Nancy Blansky, played by Nancy Walker. Yes, the bounty paper towel lady is introduced as Howard Cunningham's cousin, transported to Vegas to manage Blanskys Beauties, a cast of leggy hopefuls aiming for stardom. If you're already confused about the timeline, join the club. The show mixed up decades, with Happy Days characters popping up in a world that had somehow jumped from sock hops to disco balls without explanation. To make it weirder, Scott Baio showed up playing Anthony DeLuca, not Chachi, but close enough to break any remaining logic. The writing was a frantic mix of variety show, sitcom, and backstage drama. But instead of giving viewers a new flavor of fun, it felt like every bad Vegas cliché crammed into 22 minutes. Nancy dished out tough love to her dancers. There were endless catfights and slapstick mishaps, and because this was the late 70s, enough glitter to blind Liberace. What was missing? Any trace of what made Happy Days work. The warmth, the innocence, the sense of place. Instead, Blanskys Beauties was loud, messy, and totally unconnected to its roots. The audience response was swift and brutal. Critics roasted it, viewers ignored it, and the show was axed after just 13 episodes. Even network execs seemed eager to pretend it never happened, stuffing it deep into the Hollywood vaults. Blanskys Beauties is proof that not every universe needs to be expanded, and that sometimes you really can have too much of a good thing. Vegas, baby? More like lost wages for anyone who bet on this show's future. Hello, Larry, 1979-80. The radio host nobody tuned in for. Hello, Larry? Even the title sounds like a sitcom desperately waving for attention. NBC had a smash hit in Different Strokes, a show that proved America had an endless appetite for oddball family dynamics and Arnold's wisecracks. So, why not spin off a character played by TV's most notorious showjumper, McLean Stevenson, and see if lightning strikes again? Here's the thing. Sometimes lightning just burns your house down. Larry Alder, played by Stevenson, is a radio talk show host who moves to Portland to start fresh as a single dad to 2 teenage daughters. Sounds promising, right? Now here's where the plot trips and falls flat on its face. The show never figured out whether it wanted to be a sitcom about awkward single parenting, a workplace comedy at the radio station, or an awkward hybrid of both. Stevenson, who'd famously left Maz H at its peak only to star in a series of short-lived flops, just couldn't catch a break. In Hello, Larry, his character's advice on air was supposed to be wise and warm, but off-air, he stumbled through every parenting misstep in the book. The teenage daughters were as cliché as they came, one sassy, one sensitive, neither memorable. NBC was so desperate to make Hello, Larry work that they shoehorned in crossover episodes with the cast of Different Strokes. Suddenly, the Drummond family would pop up in Portland for the flimsiest of reasons, just to juice the ratings. Viewers could smell the desperation, and Johnny Carson had a field day, making Hello, Larry a recurring punchline in his late-night monologues. One infamous joke, the Titanic of sitcoms. Audiences didn't need an explanation. They already knew which show he meant. What stings is that Hello, Larry wasn't just bad, it was spectacularly, memorably bad. The show limped through 2 seasons, but only because NBC refused to admit defeat. Every attempt to fix it, new cast members, new plot lines, more crossovers, just made the whole thing look more like a Frankenstein's monster built out of failed sitcom tropes. There's a lesson here. You can't create chemistry by committee. and you can't force an audience to care about a character just because he used to be famous somewhere else. Sometimes, people change the channel not out of indifference, but self-preservation. Mr. T and Tina, 1976. Let's give credit where credit's due. Mr. T and Tina was the first American sitcom to star an Asian American actor, the beloved Pat Morita. But that's where the praise stops, because this spin-off is proof that good intentions can get steamrolled by bad execution. The show spun off from Welcome Back Kotter, sort of, by bringing Morita's guest character, inventor Taro Takahashi, center stage in Chicago, where he hires an all-American nanny, Tina, to help raise his kids. Sounds like a setup for cross-cultural comedy, right? Unfortunately, what viewers got was a weekly parade of tone-deaf jokes and awkward stereotypes. The entire premise revolved around Tina misinterpreting Japanese customs, while Mr. T struggled to grasp American idioms. Every joke leaned into misunderstandings, sushi gags, bowing blunders, confusion over chopsticks. You get the idea. Instead of letting Morita's considerable comic talent shine, the show used him as a prop for cringeworthy punchlines. Worse, every episode seemed written by someone who'd never met an actual Japanese person, let alone understood the basics of cultural nuance. The laugh track might as well have been a warning siren. To make matters worse, the show's supporting cast was a mishmash of sitcom archetypes: wacky neighbor, precocious kids, Tina's bumbling love interests. None of them clicked. Critics didn't hold back. Reviews called the show embarrassing, tone-deaf, and a step backwards for representation. Audiences didn't even get a chance to hate, watch. Mr. T and Tina was yanked after just 5 episodes. In TV terms, that's less than a blink of an eye. Pat Morita would go on to become a true star as Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid, proving he didn't need cheap punchlines or cultural cliches to be beloved. But Mr. T and Tina? It's a museum piece, Exhibit A in how to squander both talent and a chance for meaningful inclusion. If you ever wondered why it took so long for Hollywood to get Asian American sitcoms right, just remember Mr. T and Tina, the show that walked so future flops could never be greenlit in the first place. Who's Watching the Kids? 1978. Not all spin-offs die in a blaze of infamy. Some just vanish so thoroughly that even their stars would rather not be reminded. Case in point. Who's Watching the Kids? A Happy Days universe cast off so forgettable that even Scott Baio, who starred in it, has joked he doesn't remember doing it. This one was NBC scraping the bottom of the barrel, desperate to squeeze one more drop from their sitcom empire. The plot? A teen nightclub employee named Angie and her buddy Frankie, played by Jim Belushi in his first TV role, dream of stardom while babysitting their little siblings in Las Vegas. If that sounds like someone mashed up Three's Company, The Partridge Family, and Laverne and Shirley after one too many cocktails, you're starting to get the idea. Scott Baio played the nightclub owner's nephew, a sort of proto-Chachi with even less personality. Who's Watching the Kids? Was a continuity nightmare from the start. Characters and settings changed almost weekly. In fact, the show itself was a reboot of another failed spin-off called Legs, a title just as bad as the premise. If audiences were confused, they had company. The cast reportedly had trouble keeping up with their own plot lines. By episode 6, the series had already cycled through multiple focus changes. Was this a babysitter comedy, a backstage musical, or a family drama? In reality, it was none of the above. Ratings were dead on arrival. Critics ignored it. Viewers never found it. Even NBC seemed to forget it existed by the time the final episode limped across the finish line. There was no finale, no resolution, no tears, just silence as the set was quietly dismantled. Here's the harshest truth. When a sitcom is so forgettable that its own network erases it from memory, it's not just a flop, it's an unshow, an anti-hit. If Who's Watching the Kids proved anything, it's that spin-offs need more than a passing connection to greatness. They need a reason to exist, and this one never had a prayer. Phyllis, 1975-77. If you ever wondered what happens when you build a show around the character everyone loves to hate, Phyllis is your cautionary tale. On The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Cloris Leachman's Phyllis Lindstrom was the ultimate scene stealer, neurotic, self-absorbed, and just the right amount of grating. But when CBS decided to put Phyllis front and center in her own series, audiences quickly realized some flavors are best in small doses. The premise had Phyllis, newly widowed, moving to San Francisco with her daughter to live with her late husband's well-to-do family. Suddenly, the woman who was once Mary's high-maintenance landlady was thrust into a new social world of snobbish relatives, upscale drama, and endless personal crises. The show tried to blend fish-out-of-water humor with the sharp wit of the original, but what worked as a comic foil simply didn't translate into a compelling lead. Off-screen, tragedy struck. 3 cast members died during the show's short run, creating a dark cloud that hung over production. On-screen, the bigger problem was that Phyllis worked brilliantly when bouncing off Mary and Rhoda's warmth. Alone, her narcissism just wore people down. Viewers missed the chemistry of the original ensemble, and even Leachman's Emmy-winning talents couldn't turn self-centered suffering into comedy gold. Each episode felt like a case study in how not to do a character spin-off. Confused, tonally awkward, and desperate for a laugh track that never came. Critics were unimpressed, and viewers bailed fast. Ratings plummeted in the second season, and CBS quietly pulled the plug. The legacy? Phyllis remains a textbook case of a spin-off that shouldn't have left the parent show's orbit. It's a lesson for TV history. The side dish rarely works as the main course. Would you watch a sitcom about your least favorite neighbor moving across the country to inflict herself on a new group of victims? America didn't either. So, what have we learned? If the 70s taught us anything, it's that Hollywood's thirst for spin-offs sometimes produces TV gold, but more often, it churns out disasters nobody remembers until now. Which of these did you actually sit through? Which do you wish you could erase from memory? Drop your war stories in the comments, smash that like, and subscribe for more wild pop culture deep dives. And remember, not every side character deserves a spotlight. Some stories are best left as footnotes.